Right now in Alberta, there are over 180,000 people who are out of work. And a majority of those people have seen their jobs lost in the last couple of years. So this morning when I woke up and I heard the news of the auto plant in Oshawa being closed by General Motors, I tweeted the following: for the tens of thousands of people who have seen their jobs disappear in Alberta, our hearts go out to the people of Oshawa today. And that's a legitimate sentiment. If we're going to be a federation, people in different provinces have to stand up for each other. And from the people of Alberta, I want to send a message to those in Oshawa who are affected. We get it. We're going through this right now. This shouldn't happen. Canada should be a place where we have jobs and prosperity. Now, the interesting thing was I had several responses to this comment, a comment of sympathy, but one of them really stuck out for me, and it was this. Both, so job losses, are tied to outdated fuel sources / transportation modes. Economic hardship is always sad, but it's inevitable that we'd have to pivot. And I want to spend the bulk of my time today, Mr. Speaker, refuting the government's budgetary plan because it's based on this principle of economic management. I have watched this government travel internationally to wonderful meetings in Davos, these speeches that the Prime Minister gives in Paris, where he talks about exactly what this response said to me on Twitter. It's this leftist, elitist, academic understanding of the Canadian economy. It's a let-them-eat-cake understanding from somebody who has never really had to work a day in his life, to a bunch of people who all they want to do is just work, and they're being told that their jobs are dirty, that their jobs are outdated. Can you imagine that? Outdated mode of transportation. The last time I checked, it was cold in Canada, and we didn't have magical public transit from every place to every different place, and we still drove cars. And the last time I checked, the auto sector was one of the most important things to the Canadian economy, and the last time I checked, the energy sector in Alberta creates so much revenue for all different levels of government in this country that at the end of last week, we actually had major financial analysts asking the finance minister how he was going to deal with the fact that the significant price differential that we're receiving for our energy products as compared to if we had market access for these things, how they were going to deal with that in their budgetary forecasts. And that is why this government's approach to budgeting is so fundamentally flawed, because they don't understand the fact that Canadians want to work and want to be competitive in some of the world's most important industries, like energy production or manufacturing, and they don't understand that their high-level bourgeois thinking of what is appropriate industries or clean jobs mean to somebody who's just trying to make ends meet, and then they haven't taken any sort of understanding of these concepts into a framework that would make us more competitive, not less competitive with the United States. And they're not understanding how fundamentally damaging this is to the fabric of Canadian Federation. In my province right now, if you go door knocking, as I frequently do in my riding from house to house, first of all, you will automatically hear a tale of somebody being out of work for a very long period of time. You will hear about how people have had to shutter businesses and how we're losing labor to the United States, to other parts of the world. You will hear about the fact that City Council is increasing small business taxes by 25% because the downtown core is now looking at about a 50% plus vacancy rate, when we had, I think, a 0 vacancy rate in downtown Calgary just a few short years ago. And you will hear one other sentiment, and that is, why are we sending money to other parts of the country in equalization payments when the rest of the country won't stand up for us? The reality is, Mr. Speaker, is that the context has changed since 2015. This Prime Minister, you know, I used to think his father, Pierre Elliott Trudeau, was the worst possible Trudeau to Alberta, while he looks just absolutely great compared to his son. Bill C-69 finishes the job. It shoots the energy sector in the head. Oil is over under Bill C-69. And maybe that's what the Prime Minister wants. Maybe he's celebrating that. But my community sure isn't. The tanker ban, the carbon tax, the political veto of the Northern Gateway pipeline, not saying anything to President Obama when he vetoed the KXL pipeline. This Prime Minister and this government has done every single thing possible to kill the energy sector. And you know what? In the last budget implementation bill, they said, we're not going to look at the equalization formula. And if this Prime Minister will not stand up and will not stand up for the jobs of every part of the country, including Alberta, then we have to look at that formula because it's not fair. And I would not be doing my job as a member of Parliament from that province if I did not stand up and say here, he has a responsibility to make policy that's in the best interest of the entire country, not penalize regions because of his or his father's ideological opposition to having power and economic growth in Alberta. And that's where we're at. You cannot look at 180,000 people out of work, and you cannot look at the response that other industries get, and just the lip service. I mean, I look at his response in Calgary on Thursday. I'm so proud of my city for getting out and protesting him. I saw that, I'm like, yeah, that's great. Give him a message. I'm so proud of my city for doing that, but at the end of the day, the people of Calgary, the people of Alberta have always been happy to contribute to the entirety of Canada. But they don't want to be out protesting, they just want to work. And yet this Prime Minister comes to Canada with nothing for my city. He's still pushing through Bill C-69, full steam ahead, full steam to kill the energy sector. He is not even acknowledging the depth of crisis that his ideological opposition to the development of the energy sector has done, what that's done to the Canadian economy. And these guys will stand up with their talking points. They'll stand up with their talking points and they'll say, oh, the economy and the environment go hand in hand. There's only one reason that we will see a reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, if we do, in Canada, and that's because he's killed the energy sector. His carbon tax will do nothing to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. That's because carbon, for the most part in Canada, is inelastic. And you can't set whatever it is, whatever that United Nations report called $5,500 megaton price on carbon, and expect the economy to continue to grow. I cannot stand up here on behalf of my constituents and support anything that this government is doing in terms of taxation, in terms of budgeting, because all it is a lot of spending on nothing. This entire Budget Implementation Act, anything, there is no spending on any sort of infrastructure that is going to make my city more productive. There is nothing in there for the workers. And frankly, what's even insult to injury is he's not talking about the fact that they have underwritten and underpinned a continuous welfare system for this country based on the backs of the people in my province, and enough is enough. Enough is enough. Either this Prime Minister gets up and writes some policy that's in the best interest of the entire country, or he starts dealing with the voices of the people in my city and in my province, and they are tired of it. They're tired of it, and they will not go gently into that good night. So shame on the member from Calgary Centre, shame on the member from Calgary Skyview, shame on the members from Edmonton who have had the opportunity to speak up in their caucus for the rights of the people in this country and still see Bill C-69 going forward, still see this budget implementation going forward, spending, taxing, nothing happening for them. And enough is enough. There will be more protests like what you see in Calgary. We will not go gently into that good night, and this bill needs to die.
Questions and comments. The honourable member for Kingston and the Islands.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. We You know, I've had the opportunity to listen to this debate go on and on about the Liberals' capacity to properly run the economy. But when you actually look at the stats, there's nothing you could argue away through circumstance. The reality of the situation is the Conservatives over the last 151 years have been in power for 73% of the time. Sorry, have been in power for 38% of the time and have racked up 73% of the national debt. Wow. Out of the last 16 budgets introduced by the Conservative Party, 13 of them ran deficits. 2 of them that ran surpluses were on the heel of Paul Martin's $13 billion surplus, and the last was in 2015, and we know what they had to do, including selling off shares of GM, to get there. But my question for the member, she spent a lot of time talking about Alberta specifically. My question for her is she proud of the fact that in Alberta currently, the renewable energy sector is doubling every year in size? That's doubling in terms of employment, doubling in terms of investment, doubling in terms of outcome. Is she proud of that fact, or would she rather see us go back to continuing to use more oil?
The honourable member for Calgary-Nose Hill.
In 2008, Canada saw one of the worst economic downturns since the Great Depression. A Conservative government put in place targeted short-term infrastructure spending projects and returned the country back to balanced budgets a few short years later. This government, by contrast, in peacetime, has racked up the biggest deficits. Remember the itty-bitty little deficits, Mr. Speaker, that they were supposed to have in 2015? They're massive. But here's the thing. Any Canadian who's watching this is going to say, my taxes have gone up, I've lost my job, and what did I get? For all the money they've spent, we should have a gold-plated rocket ship to the moon. We have nothing, and that's irresponsible spending. Now, with regard to the clean tech sector, Mr. Speaker, wouldn't it be great if we had the receptor capacity of the big energy sector to adopt some of this technology here in Canada instead of licensing it out? This is a member from Ontario that fundamentally has not educated himself on any aspect of the Canadian economy, including Alberta, and I resent being told by him on behalf of my constituents what they need. He should have the honour and responsibility to vote this budget down.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciated the comments from the Minister at the beginning of her speech, because I think that all members of this House should acknowledge the economic and social impact that is taking place today in Oshawa, and just to express that our support is with the residents of Oshawa, and I think that bridges all political parties, Mr. Speaker. Having said that, then the member chose to go into more of that attack-style, personal Western alienation, and littered with all sorts of falsehoods, Mr. Speaker. And that's what I want to take exception at. You know, I would ask the member across the way to reflect on how poorly Stephen Harper did for Western Canada, whether it was Western diversification. Not one pipeline that would give us an alternative to the U.S. Market, Mr. Speaker. Stephen Harper was a disaster to the prairies, and my question to the member is, can she name something of significance that Stephen Harper did for Western Canada?
The honourable member for Calgary-Nose Hill.
Lowest federal tax burden in over 50 years. 4 pipelines built. Standing up for the energy sector. We had negotiations with the U.S. that saw our economy grow. And you know what? Let's talk about Western alienation. It is this Prime Minister who is putting forward job-killing policies that is undermining the fabric of our Confederation. Stephen Harper always told his cabinet, always, to look at policy that built the country. Anybody who is standing up in Calgary right now and saying, where is my job? Why are we paying equalization? It is because this Prime Minister is doing what his father almost did but failed to do, and that is to put Alberta down, to shoot Alberta in the head. I've had enough of this, and I will stand up here every single time, and as a member of Parliament from Winnipeg, my hometown, to somehow try and whitewash or try and gloss over the fact that this Prime Minister has done sweet fudge all for Western Canada, he should be ashamed. He should be ashamed, and he should totally be resigned. His constituents should vote him out. He should be standing up for Western Canada, all of Canada, and he's failed to do it.